You ever have something that just makes your day a little brighter? For me, it was my chickens. Yes, chickens. Not only were they the fluffiest little goofballs you'd ever meet, but they became a sort of local celebrity in our quiet neighborhood. People walking by would stop just to snap a photo. Kids would giggle watching them scratch around the yard. And even the grumpiest neighbors couldn't help but smile when they saw my little flock doing their silly chicken strut. Honestly, they were more than just pets. They were a part of our family. We named them, spoiled them with treats, and treated them like our own quirky little backyard squad. But apparently, not everyone saw them that way. One afternoon, out of nowhere, I got this cold, official-looking letter tucked under my doormat. It was from the HOA. I opened it, thinking it was about lawn maintenance or something boring. But nope. It was a notice claiming my chickens were a violation of community standards and had to be removed immediately. I read the letter twice, thinking there had to be some mistake. My chickens had never caused a single complaint until now, and just like that, something that had brought joy to my home and even to the neighbors was being labeled a nuisance. I couldn't believe it. I mean, I followed the rules. I kept the coop clean. There were no roosters, no noise issues, happy hens quietly laying eggs and minding their business. So why now? What suddenly made them such a problem? The more I asked around, the more it started to feel like someone behind the scenes had it out for me or for my chickens. Was it jealousy? A personal grudge? Or just someone on a power trip with nothing better to do? All I knew was I wasn't going down without a fight. These chickens weren't just cute, they were innocent. And if the HOA thought they could bully me into giving up my girls, they were about to meet their match. But that was just the beginning. What started as a small backyard disagreement quickly turned into something way bigger than I ever imagined. And let's just say, feathers definitely got ruffled. It all started a few months before that letter showed up. I had just finished building a small, cozy coop in the corner of my backyard. Nothing fancy, just a clean, safe space for the girls to nest and roam during the day. I even added a tiny handmade sign that read Cluckingham Palace, which people found hilarious. I live in a quiet suburban neighborhood where everyone knows each other by name. And honestly, things had always felt pretty friendly. I'd wave to neighbors, lend tools when asked, and kept my yard tidy. The chickens only made things better: eggs for friends, smiles from strangers, and plenty of harmless entertainment. So when the HOA suddenly claimed I was disrupting community standards, I couldn't help but feel blindsided. It wasn't just the letter, they also attached a fine and said I had 10 days to remove the chickens or face further action. I thought, seriously? For what? Being adorable and laying eggs? That's when I started looking closer into the rules. I flipped through every page of their handbook and found something interesting. There was no clear rule banning chickens. In fact, it was vague at best. Something about non-traditional pets being discouraged, but nothing specifically saying they weren't allowed. At first I thought maybe someone on the board just misunderstood, so I showed up to the next HOA meeting, thinking we could clear it up. That's when things started to feel off. I barely got a word in before one of the board members, a woman named Carol, cut me off. She said, "Backyard livestock doesn't belong in a family neighborhood." Her tone was sharp, like she had already made up her mind. And judging by the looks passed between a couple of the others, I wasn't the only one who noticed. Something wasn't right. I left that meeting more confused than when I arrived. Carol had never spoken to me before, never once complained or even mentioned the chickens. Why was she suddenly leading the charge to get them removed? A few neighbors later mentioned they'd seen her peeking into my yard and making calls from the sidewalk. One even said she muttered something about setting a standard in the neighborhood. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just about chickens. It felt personal. And I couldn't help but wonder, what exactly was her problem with my backyard birds? After that HOA meeting, things started changing in small but noticeable ways. A few of my usual neighborly chats got a little awkward. Some folks still smiled and waved, but others suddenly acted like they didn't see me. It was subtle, but I felt it. One day, I found a note taped to my fence that said, "This isn't a farm." No name, no handwriting I recognized. Just the kind of thing meant to get under your skin. That's when I realized this chicken drama was spreading deeper than I thought. I started talking to other neighbors more directly. Turns out, a lot of them actually liked the chickens. Mrs. Miller from down the block said her grandkids always asked to visit the fluffy ladies. Even Mr. Danvers, who I thought didn't like anyone, admitted he appreciated the fresh eggs I left on his porch. But every time I brought up the HOA's complaint, people would get quiet or look over their shoulder before saying, "You didn't hear it from me." But that's when I learned Carol had been going door to door, trying to get people to sign a petition to ban backyard poultry completely. Some refused. Others said they didn't want to get involved. A few even signed just to keep peace. But here's where it got even more strange. I did a little digging, nothing shady, just public records and HOA minutes, and guess what I found? Carol was pushing for a new zoning restriction that would not only ban chickens, but also allow for aesthetic standard improvements across the neighborhood. It sounded harmless, until I realized that it meant she could influence what people did with their own yards, flowers, fences, even patio furniture. It wasn't just about animals. It was about control. Then came the rumor. Someone at the community pool let it slip that Carol had recently applied to be president of the HOA and wanted to clean up the look of the area to attract higher-end buyers. I wasn't sure if that was true or not, but it lined up with everything else. Suddenly, my chickens weren't just chickens, they were standing in the way of someone's bigger plan. I wasn't the only one who noticed either. A neighbor I barely knew, Jake, stopped me one evening and said, "You're not crazy. Something's off. I think they're trying to push people like us out." I asked what he meant, but before he could say more, he just gave a half smile and walked away. The more I looked into it, the more I realized this chicken fight wasn't just mine. And it definitely wasn't over yet. After that talk with Jake, I couldn't shake the feeling that this went deeper than just an issue about backyard chickens. More and more neighbors were starting to whisper about changes in the HOA, strange new rules being rushed through without discussion, and how some properties were suddenly being flagged for the smallest things: paint colors, garden gnomes, even bird feeders. It felt like a quiet takeover, and I started to wonder if I was just the first test. Then, just when I thought things couldn't get worse, I got hit with a second violation notice. This time, it wasn't just about the chickens, it included a fine for unapproved structures, which meant my coop, a coop that had been up for months, with no problems, and had even gotten compliments before. They also threatened legal action if I didn't remove everything within 5 days. 5. I stared at the paper, heart pounding, thinking, what do they want me to do, evict my pets? That's when I decided enough was enough. I made flyers and walked door to door, sharing what I'd learned about the vague rules, about the zoning push, and about how the HOA was slowly creeping into everyone's yards. Some people were shocked. Others had already started facing their own weird warnings from the board. A few had been too scared to speak up, but now, they started opening up. It was like once someone finally called it out, people realized they weren't alone. One night, I held a small backyard meeting, just neighbors who had been quietly frustrated and wanted to talk. We stood by the coop, my chickens clucking softly behind us, and for the first time, it felt like we weren't just reacting, we were organizing. Someone suggested checking the HOA's election rules. Another mentioned bringing this to the next community vote. People offered to write letters, show up at meetings, even start a neighborhood petition. It was starting to shift, but we knew it wouldn't be easy. Right after that meeting, a white SUV rolled slowly past my house. No one inside waved. It just idled for a few seconds, then drove off. The next morning, a city compliance officer showed up unannounced. They said they received a community concern and needed to inspect my property. It was clear this wasn't just about chickens anymore. Someone was watching, and they were doubling down. And I had a feeling the real fight was just around the corner. The city compliance officer's visit rattled me more than I wanted to admit. He wasn't rude actually, he seemed a bit uncomfortable, like he didn't even want to be there. He glanced at the coop, took a few pictures, and said, "This is just protocol. Someone filed a complaint through the online system. Happens more than you think," but the timing couldn't have been worse. It felt calculated, like someone behind the scenes was pulling strings, trying to rattle me or catch me slipping. And just like that, the fear of losing my chickens wasn't just from HOA pressure anymore, it now involved the city. But the real twist came later that week. I got a message from Jake, just a simple, "You need to see this." He sent over a scanned document from a public archive showing a recent proposal to the HOA board. It wasn't just about banning chickens. It was about rezoning a section of the neighborhood, including mine, to allow for multifamily redevelopment. In plain terms, condos, townhomes, developers circling like hawks. And guess whose name was tied to the proposal as a silent partner? Carol's cousin. It hit me like a freight train. This wasn't just a personal grudge, it was business. The chickens were just a smokescreen. Suddenly, it all clicked. The tightened rules, the citations, the pressure, it was all a slow squeeze to push certain homeowners out. Ones with older properties, bigger yards, or things that didn't match the new vision they were trying to build. My coop and chickens just made me an easy target. And if they could wear me down, maybe others would fall in line too. I felt a mix of panic and fire. They weren't just trying to silence me, they were laying the groundwork to reshape the entire neighborhood. People who had lived here for years, built lives and raised kids, were slowly being nudged out without even realizing what was happening. That's when I knew the stakes were way bigger than just my flock. If I backed down, it would open the door for them to keep going. And if I kept pushing, I was going to need more than angry flyers and polite neighborhood meetings. Because this wasn't just a chicken battle anymore, it was a fight for our community, and someone was willing to play dirty to win. With the rezoning plot exposed and my coop under official scrutiny, I knew I had to move fast. The next HOA meeting was just days away, and it wasn't just another gathering, it was the vote. Not just on my chickens, but on the proposed amendments that would change the neighborhood forever. I spent every hour leading up to it rallying neighbors, sharing the truth, and encouraging them to show up. Even those who had stayed quiet before were now stepping out of the shadows. People were angry not just about the chickens, but about being manipulated without even knowing it. That night, the community center was packed. More residents than I'd ever seen showed up, some with kids, others holding signs, a few with photos of their own backyards. As soon as the meeting opened, Carol took the mic like she always did, calm and rehearsed. She started explaining the proposed changes using vague words like modernization and enhancement. But before she could finish, a neighbor stood up and asked, "Why didn't you mention the redevelopment plans tied to your cousin's company?" You could feel the air leave the room. Carol froze for a second. Then more hands went up, one after another. People began sharing what they'd learned, what they'd experienced, the surprise citations, the silent pressure, the sudden shift in tone from the board. Even the quietest folks in the back started nodding. It wasn't just about backyard chickens anymore, it was about trust. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't come with papers or legal terms. I just talked from the heart. I told them about my chickens, what they meant to me, and how this whole thing opened my eyes to something bigger. I looked around the room and said, "This isn't just about hens. It's about whether we want to live in a neighborhood that listens to us or one that silences us." The board called for a vote. One by one, the hands went up. The proposal to ban chickens failed badly. The rezoning amendments were thrown out, too. It felt like justice, like the whole neighborhood had finally woken up. But just when I thought it was over, a man from the back of the room raised his hand. "Actually," he said, "I pulled a few records of my own. Turns out, Carol's been collecting reimbursement checks from the HOA for community projects that don't exist." The room went quiet again. Carol's face turned pale. That wasn't just a petty rule, that was fraud. In the end, my chickens stayed right where they belonged. But Carol, let's just say the board didn't meet again with her in charge. After that explosive HOA meeting, things started settling down in the neighborhood. Carol stepped down quietly, and a new interim board was put in place made up of people who actually lived here for more than the rules. One of the first things they did was clear up the confusion in the community guidelines. Backyard chickens, so long as they were well kept and quiet, were officially allowed. No more vague language. No more silent threats taped to fences. The coop stayed right where it was, and the girls Betty Nugget and Peep went back to doing their thing like nothing had ever happened. It's funny how calm they stayed through all of it. Maybe that's why I admired them so much, they just lived in the moment, no matter what chaos swirled around them. A few neighbors who had been unsure before actually came by to ask how to start their own little flocks. It turned out, a lot of people had been quietly wishing they could do the same but didn't think it was allowed. As for Jake, he and I became pretty good friends after all this. He ended up running for the HOA board in the next election. He said he wanted to make sure no one else went through what I did. Even Mrs. Miller got involved, helping with newsletters and bringing cookies to meetings. What started as a fight over chickens had somehow brought the whole community closer. Looking back, the biggest lesson wasn't about rules or power, it was about standing up, even when it's uncomfortable. If I hadn't pushed back, if I had just quietly taken down the coop, none of the shady stuff behind the scenes would have come to light. It wasn't just my backyard at stake, it was the kind of neighborhood we all wanted to live in. Every time I sit outside and hear the gentle clucks from the coop, it's more than just a peaceful sound. It's a reminder that small things like a few backyard chickens can make a big difference. And that sometimes, all it takes to protect what matters is a little courage, a few good neighbors, and the willingness to speak up when it counts. So yeah, my chickens really are the cutest in the neighborhood. But now, they're also a symbol of how one small stand turned into something much bigger.